expanding this project. You put a little bit more meat on the bones on the ambition of it, and ballpark dollar amount, how long this will take. And then secondly, just a broad question about the meeting last night. There's been some sense of with Modi appreciating the turn and the attention that the administration is giving to the Indo-Pacific, but would like to see a little bit more Indo to that part of it. Did that come up in the conversation?
Thanks. So a couple things. First, on the corridor project, I'm not going to get into the details and sort of scoop our own announcement in that way. I did want to preview it a bit for you all to give you some context. Taking a step back, though, from the details, I can give you a bit more of the strategic theory of the case for why we think this is important. First and foremost is the value proposition we see in a corridor linking these three key regions of the world and enabling the flow of commerce, of energy, of digital communications that we think is going to help increase prosperity at a time in which that is in high demand. Second, we have talked at great length about the broader global infrastructure gap, which is particularly acute in low and middle income countries. And much of the theory of the case of PGI is about doing what the United States can with our partners in filling that gap. Third, for the Middle East in particular, which, historically has, obviously often been a net exporter of turbulence and insecurity, to have the opportunity to play this key role in the kind of global connective tissue of commerce, of digital communications, of energy, linking these key regions, we think is a huge opportunity, building on our broader efforts over the last couple of years to turn the temperature down across the region, increase connectivity within the region, and address a conflict where we see it. But just taking one more step back on the theory of the case, we see this as having a high appeal to the countries involved, and also globally, because it is transparent, because it is high standard, because it is not coercive. We feel demand that we are being responsive to in these regions of the world. We are not going out and trying to impose anything on anyone, and so we feel good about what we have on offer. On your question about the Prime Minister and our Indo-Pacific strategy and implementation, I would be frankly surprised to hear the charge that you laid out, in part because of how intensive our focus has been on the bilateral relationship between the United States and India, but also on the broader Indian Ocean region. Given obviously the enormous steps forward that were made around Prime Minister Modi's state visit to Washington, if you go back and read the documents that emerged from that visit, the deep commitments that were made on both sides to enhance our cooperation, and then just to follow up only a few months later with this bilateral meeting last night that was important in its own right, but that also helped drive further implementation and outcomes, building on the high ambition of the state visit. And I think you all saw an extremely detailed joint statement that was released last night that is not just rhetoric. It is actual things that are happening in the world that the United States and India are driving together. And so I think we feel good about our investments here in India, here in this region, more broadly in the Indo-Pacific, and are going to continue implementing that strategy.
Okay, we're going to start with somebody on the Zoom here. Who we've got? Give people a chance.
Alex Ward, let's kick it over to you.
All right, Alex.
Thanks. The first one, in the Modi meeting, I just want to know if anything about the bulldozing of the slums came up at all. Did the president mention that as a way of just saying, hey, this is not how democratic nations behave?
So, Alex, first, thanks for the question. What I will say is that the sort of state of democratic governance, both in the world and in each of our countries, is a core facet of the U.S.-India bilateral relationship. And both Prime Minister Modi and President Biden have said that, which means that those issues are very much on the agenda in every one of their conversations. What I'm not going to do, given the fact that we did a pretty extensive on the record readout of this meeting last night, and also submitted, which I just referenced, quite an extensive and detailed joint statement, is go through sort of issue by issue and say what was covered and what wasn't. I mean, what I will say is we have got an enormously broad and consequential relationship with India, and all of these meetings take place in the context of limited time. So it would be, I worry, misleading to say what was above the line and below the line in terms of what they were able to cover. What I will say is the broad category of issue that falls into democratic governance and its state in the United States and in India was very much on the agenda.
Okay. Go ahead, Justin. Justin's going to take it. Go ahead.
Thanks, John. One sort of thing that we've heard from the meeting so far is, I think, familiar complaints and frustration from Europeans and some in Asia over the president's economic agenda, the subsidies for climate and chips. I'm wondering how if there's any new explanation that you're offering to that, and assuming not, to kind of spin it forward, are you confident that the steel deal with the Europeans is going to come together by the Van der Leyen summit next month? Has there been progress on the critical minerals deal for the EU? And are you engaging with any new countries on those types of deals here at the summit going forward to sort of address some of their concerns over, subsidies?
So first, thanks for the question, Justin. As you know, we have a deeply integrated economic relationship with countries across Europe, with the European Union as an entity. And when it comes to the historic investments that the United States and that President Biden is making, in our own country, on infrastructure, on chips, on driving the climate and clean energy transition through the IRA, we believe that is not just a set of initiatives and major pieces of legislation that are good for the United States. We believe they're fundamentally good for the world. And we believe that our partners are increasingly seeing the value proposition, again, not just for us, but for them in what we are doing. We work extremely closely with those partners on ways in which they can be integrated and incorporated into what we are doing domestically, the ways in which it benefits them, their citizens, their companies. And we think that we are on a very constructive and positive track in making that case with our core partners. So I beyond that, I'm not going to get into the specifics of steel or other kind of ongoing conversations, other than to say we consider these conversations extremely important. We're working very hard to make progress.
Okay, who do we have online? We'll come back. In the Zoom.
Let's go to Barack Ravid. Barack.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Hi, John. I missed the beginning of the briefing, so maybe you covered it, and if so let me know, and I'll look afterwards what you said. But how does the railway project fits into the wider strategy in the Middle East, the mega deal you tried to get with Saudi Arabia, the normalization process? Is Israel going to be part of it?
Sorry, Barack, were you finished? I think so. Okay. I won't repeat everything I said in the sort of prepared remarks at the beginning. What I will say is, first, it's not just a railway project. It's a ship and railway project, and that's, I think, important for people to understand because it speaks to both the breadth and the scope of how expansive and ambitious and frankly groundbreaking this will be. Second, in terms of how the Middle East fits into it, I think we have an approach to the Middle East that we have been implementing since the very first day of this administration that is focused on turning the temperature down, on de-escalating the conflicts that have been underway in some cases for many years in the region. And I would point to the 18-month now relative truce that has been in place in Yemen as just one kind of core example of that. And frankly, on incentivizing both stability in the region and connectivity among the countries of the region. And this railway project and the opportunities step forward once these conversations can now get underway more formally with the launch of the MOU.
Go ahead, Nandita.
Thanks, great. John, you just spoke a little bit about China's absence from the summit and said that China is not committed to the success of the G20, and that is unfortunate. Could you expound on that a little bit? And is that your takeaway from their absence at the G20? And then there is an event at 5 p.m. to talk infrastructure today on the president's schedule. Is that where we should hope you're announcing the real deal?
On your second question, yeah, that is likely to be the slot in which you'll learn more about what I've laid out. But look, on China, I feel like one interesting dynamic of China's kind of role in these institutions and some of the steps it takes in the world is that the United States is often called upon to explain actions that are taken by the Chinese government. And to be honest, I don't think we really see that as our role. We are focused on kind of our agenda here at the G20, on the leadership role that we see President Biden playing. And when you go through kind of the highlights of what is likely to be accomplished here, it is very much in line with and consistent with our global priorities and those of our partners. And we believe of the rest of the G20, including countries that China considers to be its core partners, like some of the BRICS countries that I mentioned earlier. As for why China isn't here, I don't see that as something for the U.S. to expound on or speculate about. One, I'm not sure we have a clear answer to that question. But two, really, it's incumbent upon the Chinese government to explain why a leader would or would not participate. What I was responding to, in many ways, was analysis that we see, which I think is also speculative about trying to explain, China's participation or lack thereof. They will be represented here. They'll be represented at the premier level. And, beyond that, I think I'd leave it to them to explain the decision making on their side.
All right. Who do we have in the Zoom?
Let's go to Ed O'Keefe next. Ed.
Ed, are you there? Okay. Go ahead, Ozma.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Go ahead, Ed, and then we'll go to Ozma after that.
Sorry
Ed,
about that.
we can hear you.
Thank you guys for doing this. Good. Real quick, can you give us, John, a sense of who else he might be meeting with, either formally or informally today? I realize this is fluid and it's kind of like going to a high school reunion where you never know who you're going to run into. But is there any better sense of who he might meet with formally or informally, which helps us fill out what we're telling folks back home, especially this morning on broadcasts? And then we know we're in another country that has different press rules and restrictions. Can we walk everyone through sort of why it is we may not be able to see certain things today and what we are now hopefully going to be able to have access to? I know there's been a lot of work on that by the White House with the Indian government, despite the fact that, for example, last night we were kept off the grounds during that meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. So this may not be a satisfying answer to your first question, but I promise you it's an honest answer. These events tend to be extremely highly regimented and scheduled, with kind of every minute or even 5-minute block kind of accounted for during the course of the day. And so the reason we have not read out what bilateral interactions the president may have during the course of the G20 is that those interactions will often happen in a very ad hoc way, kind of done on the fly, kind of catch as catch can. And we do expect that he will have substantive interactions with some of his fellow world leaders. If and as those occur, we will read them out to you all, so you both know what happened and a bit about what was discussed. But because I can't actually be sure which interactions we will be able to produce during the course of a very scheduled day, I don't want to preview any of that for you at this point. We will be as transparent as possible about who he sees and what they talk about. On access, I think we've spoken to this quite a lot. I know Karine has. I know Jake and others have. We have all been in touch directly with our Indian counterparts, conveying not just, by the way, the request that you all have for greater access to these proceedings, but our own view that would be a better way to proceed. At the end of the day, the Indians are the host of this event. They have a set of protocols that they are adhering to. We're going to continue to advocate for access, as we do in all visits and all interactions that the president has when overseas. But I don't think I can, explain the exact details of where you all will be allowed to be present and why, other than to say this has been on our agenda in every one of our recent conversations. Karine may have more to add, but for now, we will continue to raise these things. We know they're important to you. They're also important to us.
Yeah, and like John said, and you guys have heard from me, heard from Jake, most recently in the Gaggle on our way here. We have made some improvements for today in particular, and so which is good. It's not what we want 100%, as you all know. As John just said, we work with every summit anytime we travel to do these travels to make sure that we get you all access, and we will always continue to do that. And so again, we've made some improvements today, and we'll just continue to hammer that home. But obviously, free press is the pillar of our democracy, as you've heard me say many times before, and the president say. And so we will do everything that we can to make sure that you all are able to cover as much as possible, especially as it relates to the president of the United States. Go ahead.
And I have two just brief questions. One is on the joint communique. I know there has been recently, I should say, difficulty writing issuing one given the conflict in Ukraine. I'm curious, with at least China's top leadership not being here, Xi Jinping, if you can give us an assessment of if specifically on the Ukraine matter, there's more consensus and your optimism on that front. The second is on this memo of understanding. Can you give us a timeline, a horizon of how far off is this from becoming a reality? I realize there's a memo of understanding being issued, but then when does it become real?
So look, on the potential for a joint communique, I don't want to get ahead of conversations that are genuinely ongoing about the substance of all of that. What I will say is that this is always more challenging in this format than it is, for example, in the G7. The G7 tends to be an extremely like-minded grouping of countries, and the G20 is just a more diverse body with a wider range of views on particularly some of the global issues, with Russia and Ukraine, being high on that list. What I will say is that is part of what makes the G20 an appealing format for the United States. It gives us a chance to interact with and work with and take constructive steps with a wider range of countries, including some, frankly, that we don't see eye to eye with on every issue. But it's not lost on us, and I'm sure it's not lost on you, that getting agreement on specific language related to, for example, the Russia-Ukraine conflict in a body that includes Russia, which is the perpetrator of what is a war of aggression, is going to be more challenging. So we're working through those challenges. We think we have made a very compelling case for how we see that conflict to the other countries of the G20. We see outside of the context of this format, I think, increasingly constructive comments and approaches to the Russia-Ukraine conflict among some of the G20 members and other countries in the regions that they represent. Where exactly we land on a joint communique, we'll learn more about in the coming hours. But this is always a harder proposition here than it is in bilateral meetings, than it is in some other multilateral settings where countries are much more purely like-minded. That's just the way it is.
And then on the shipping corridor.
Yeah, on the MOU. So look, all of that is going to be subject to the actual detailed conversations that the MOU will launch. And so, the exact timeline of kind of how long it'll take to play that out, I don't even want to speculate about at this point. What I will say is this is a long time coming. This has been the result of months of careful diplomacy, quiet, careful diplomacy, bilaterally and in multilateral settings that has kind of led to this moment where we're ready to now unveil what will be a process going forward that we think has enormous potential. But exactly how long it takes, I don't know.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up. I know, Ariel, you have a quick question. Do that, and then we'll take one last one from Zoom.
Climate, can you maybe update us? Where are we to negotiating phasing, for example, on phasing out or phasing down fossil fuels? And do you see this G20 summit as setting expectations for the COP?
So on climate, again, I don't want to get ahead of the exact details of negotiation that'll take place in the joint communique. What I will say is there will be a lot of discussion in the sessions that I described earlier on, for example, the clean energy transition, on when it comes to infrastructure. The United States' view, which we think we're finding increasing traction for, that infrastructure projects should be done in a way that is sustainable, should be in furtherance of sustainability goals and not at odds with them. And so I think you'll hear us speak to that as well during the course of today. We've got now several months to go, or at least a couple of months to go before the COP. There's a lot of intensive negotiation going on about that as well. This is obviously a milestone on the path to the UAE for that event, and beyond that, I think you will see some language in the communique when the negotiations are completed. But I don't want to prejudge where that's going to land.
All right, we're going to take one last question for someone on Zoom. Yeah.
Nadia Babasi, let's go to you, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead, Nadia.
Hello. Okay, great. Thank you, Karine. Thank you, John. On the infrastructure deal, by involving India, some say that actually the deal aims to counter increasing Chinese influence in the Middle East. Do you agree with this analysis? And at later stage, I know you don't want to go into the details of implementation, etc., but do you see Israel being involved at one stage, since you're talking about a greater Middle East? Thank you.
Thank you. So what I will say is I realize the appeal of kind of the narrative that you just laid out, but the way we see the infrastructure project, and frankly the way we see all of PGI, is that it is an affirmative, positive agenda and kind of vision for global infrastructure that the United States and our partners are laying out, that we think has real appeal for countries in regions that are underserved by infrastructure, that have these enormous gaps that need to be filled. We do not see it as zero sum with other approaches to infrastructure. We are not asking countries to make this zero sum choice, but we do think the value proposition that we have to offer is high, and frankly, we have seen other efforts that are not as ambitious when it comes to high standards, when it comes to transparency, when it comes to sustainability, and that are fundamentally more coercive in nature. We feel good about the contrast that what we are offering provides. In terms of other countries beyond those that I've mentioned that are participating in the announcement today, I will let those countries speak for themselves about what role they may be playing.
Then John, sorry, one last question from Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Karine. Thank you, John. You said the president plans to raise the Russia's war in Ukraine in the first session. Zelensky was not invited to attend the G20 in person. Did the president make an appeal to Modi to have him participate virtually or in some other way, as he has in the past with international summits? I know Jake said yesterday it would be a good thing for Zelensky to have a role in the G20, and is the president disappointed that he doesn't in this one?
So our view is that it is fundamentally a good thing when President Zelensky is able to make his case and Ukraine's case for how damaging this conflict has been to his people and to his country. That he is the most effective messenger for that, and that certainly in a format in which Russian representatives will be able to give their views about the conflict, it is appropriate for Ukraine to be able to offer its perspective. Ultimately, that was not and is not our decision. We did express our support for his inclusion. He will have no shortage of other opportunities to do that. He is a very credible and effective messenger for it. But you can expect that the United States and that our other partners who are working with Ukraine so closely and who have committed to doing so for as long as it takes will make that case quite forcefully in the context of these conversations.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Have a great day.